2 days after a vehicle attack in Lower Manhattan killed 8 people and injured many others, details are emerging about the history and possible motives of the 29-year-old suspect. Saifullo Saipov, who came to the United States from Uzbekistan on a lottery visa in 2010, has told authorities he carried out the attack, quote, for ISIS. New evidence suggests that he had been planning the attack for up to a year. Federal authorities on Wednesday charged Saipov with terrorism, saying that his attack was straight out of the ISIS playbook. President Trump twice tweeted that Saipov should get the death penalty. Joining me now from Washington is Devlin Barret. He covers national security and counterterrorism for the Washington Post. And with me here in New York, Michael Daly. He's a special correspondent with the Daily Beast. Welcome to you both. Michael, let me start with you.
Hi.
What do we know now that we didn't know yesterday?
What do we know now that we didn't know yesterday? I don't know if there's anything dramatic that we know. You have more of a picture of the guy, of this man who a computer chose him. I mean, he's working for a hotel back home in Uzbekistan. He's 21 years old, and he wins. And, you know, whether or not he really wanted to do it or not, I'm sure everybody said, you won the lottery. I mean, it's like he went to the corner and played Mega Millions and won it. So he's going to come. Mm-hmm. And he comes and he stays with some people in Ohio. And he has an idea that he was, I guess, was a bookkeeper in a hotel back home, in a reasonably good hotel, and he thought he might do it here, but the problem is he doesn't speak English, and there aren't a lot of Uzbeki hotels in America. And so the guy he was staying with was driving trucks, so he started driving trucks, and you can see this guy kind of solitary driving all over the United States in this truck, coming back to his family. He gets married. He has 2 daughters. And then his wife becomes pregnant with a 3rd child. And if you think that he's planning this for a year, that means that whole time that she's pregnant, he's coming home, and he's planning something like that. While the son is coming into being, and I guess, or the son's born, that doesn't change anything. And while the son's born and starting life, daddy's collecting videos of beheadings, ISIS beheadings and torture and murders on his cell phone. One of the things I noted where he was living in New Jersey, this fellow, there's kid toys out front. One is a little fire engine. And, you know, if you come from the city of New York and you look at a fire engine, you think of the FDNY, and that makes you think of 9/11. And yesterday, there was a truck from 1010, which is the firehouse right next to the World Trade Center, driving down the path that this guy took, washing away the blood, with a police helicopter above it. And I think there's been nothing we've learned about him that you didn't kind of know the minute you heard that it happened. Mm-hmm. I mean, another kind of lone loser, a guy who picked up stuff from ISIS. If you follow the ISIS magazines at all, you kind of knew. I mean, the cops that night were talking about the ISIS playbook, and even down ISIS even talked about you should throw leaflets, right? Well, this guy's idea of leaflets was 2 pieces of printer paper on which he'd written the same message a couple of times, and his idea of distributing them, they were like 10 feet from his truck. But he did everything except for the end where he's supposed to martyr himself. He's supposed to inflict more casualties. He had a fake gun and couldn't get to his knives, so he ends up not doing that, and then he doesn't martyr himself. And now you got the President of the United States saying that, well, he ought to get executed. You know, maybe that isn't going to break this guy's heart.
Devlin Barrett, this is a case that we're hearing about radicalization that happened after he was here in the United States. Yesterday, in the papers, we're talking about 90 videos, 3,800 images recovered from his cell phone and other places.
Yeah, and what he has described, according to the court documents, what he's described is that he watched these videos a lot, that they sort of both encouraged and I think probably, you know, got him more accustomed to the notion of taking lives and hurting people, because the videos he's watching are obviously pretty gruesome. And it seems like he was using the videos and some other things to basically psych himself up to this. That's the description we're getting from folks who are working this case. And it is, as Mike said, it's an incredibly sad thing, but it's also in some ways very predictable in the sense of he had a flash to bang of what they call about, you know, a year, meaning he starts thinking about this a year ago. 2 months ago, he starts to get very serious about it. And we were told in recent weeks that he'd been practicing driving these kind of rental trucks to make sure he knew how to handle them.
Also, he was driving for Uber. Can you imagine a guy who came to America thinking of glory and all? Now he's driving an Uber. Probably isn't too happy driving an Uber. But what does he do when he's driving an Uber? He scouts that route. And, you know, this guy's driving along the West Side Highway in Manhattan. It's one of the most beautiful things you could see is people biking and jogging and walking and living their lives along the water with the Statue of Liberty off to the right and the Freedom Tower rising there. I mean, it's this beautiful thing, and he's driving his Uber through there, and he's thinking what he's going to do to kill people. And radicalization, I don't know if that's the right word, because I don't think it's religion, or when you get down to it, it's not really religion. It's people working out their own personal pathologies, grabbing onto something. I mean, you know, I think of Muhammad Atta, who flew the first plane into the World Trade Center. When they went to his father and said he'd done it, the father's reaction was, oh, he couldn't have done that, he's too weak. She said, okay. Or if you think of Osama bin Laden, I think he was like his father's 53rd kid, but his mommy's one and only boy. So, I mean, I think with all these guys, you can see a certain pathology at work. And what they do is they latch onto that stuff. And it's out there for these guys. I mean, he's got a whole phone, 2 phones of this stuff, right? 2 phones of these kind of twisted ways that he can fill everything inside himself that might feel empty. That he's not just a guy driving some truck through this bizarre country called America, that you know, he's got power, he's connected into something big. It wasn't a mistake for him to leave home, right? And I think ultimately he wanted to prove he really did win the lottery. You know, that, you know, I am a winner. I did win something, because, you know, I'm with ISIS. And, you know, he talked to the cops about hanging an ISIS flag in his hospital room. I mean, that's a guy who's nuts. That is not a guy who's radicalized. That's a guy who became nuts, I think.
So, Devlin Barrett, you combine the pathology there with almost the manual. It's written and published in, what, June of this year? It's almost terror by numbers. And he follows a checklist.
Sure, and what you've seen here is that, you know, as terrorism has evolved since 9/11, you know, 9/11 compared to this was incredibly complex and sophisticated. This is literally find a big heavy vehicle and just find some pedestrians and bicyclists and plow them down. There is a, you know, a de-technologization of this whole thing, where now, you know, as the ISIS propaganda says, use a rock, use a car, use anything you have, and that'll be enough. And you know, you can call it pathological, you can call it broken people, you can call it, you know, just people who have some serious problems. You know, for them, that's enough.
Now, what about this idea of, you've mentioned a couple of times, that lottery and the visa program now? Yesterday, the president, during his press conference, went out of his way to say that he could have, this individual, the attacker, would have brought in, or he was a reference for a number of other people. What do we know about that, Michael?
That I'm not clear on now. I mean, that stuff I think is really dangerous, because then you start going, well, this guy came in on this plane with this guy, and he went to this wedding and was seen with this guy, and, you know, that's like going to a mafia wedding and you think, well, you know, this guy was seen coming in here, and he later went to dinner with Fuzzi, and then Fuzzi went to, you know. So I think that stuff is a little dangerous. I don't think that this guy was like, you know, the center of some cell or something, or he may have in the mosque. I mean, some people in the mosque noticed that he was like getting a little extreme, and the more conservative, the more reasonable people told him he ought to cool it. I'm sure that other people who were hot-headed kind of noticed, you know, that he was, you know, they probably passed remarks or something, but it doesn't seem to me. I mean, this guy's plot consisted of going to Home Depot, taking the 1995 deal for 75 minutes. I mean, first, yeah, and then putting down $50 deposit. He leaves his car because ISIS said, don't take your car, get a truck. And then he goes and does it. I mean, that's his whole plot.
Devlin Barrett, what about this idea that as the actual caliphate gets smaller and smaller and faces more intense military pressure in that part of the world, the virtual caliphate seems untouchable, and it seems to grow rapidly?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think certainly the virtual caliphate, the notion that the ideas themselves can be infectious for a small percentage of people in the universe, I think that's very true, and that you don't really need a coherent state to make that happen. And just to your other point, as far as the points of contact and the 23 other individuals, just if it helps people understand, so he was we're told he was listed as a point of contact for about 23 other people who came or wanted to come from Uzbekistan to America. That's not the same thing as sponsoring someone. He was a green card holder, so he can't actually sponsor anyone to come here beyond his wife and his children. So I think there's been a lot of misinformation as to what that 23 people point of contact thing means. And I think, frankly, it doesn't mean a ton. However, we do know that in the course of the last year or two, the FBI was interested in a friend of his, and that's how he had sort of come up on the radar ever so slightly before any of this stuff happened. But what's been said to me is they were really not focused on him. They were really looking at someone else. And the thing that's been said to me is the Uzbek community is such a small immigrant community in this country that a lot of them know each other, and a lot of them have, use each other as references or just have, 2 degrees of separation. So we're being cautioned by sources to not read too much into these things because it is just a very small and insular immigrant community.
So that's absolutely true.
Andrew Cuomo, Governor Cuomo said there's no evidence that suggests a wider plot or a wider scheme. Can we confirm that at this point?
Well, I don't think you can confirm it, but I mean, there definitely is a plot in the sense that ISIS puts this stuff out. I mean, their plot is, if we put all this stuff out, if we put this recipe out, I mean, they put out a recipe for a pressure cooker bomb, and the next thing you got the Boston Marathon. Then they put out, okay, we're not going to do the pressure cookers anymore with the Christmas tree lights. We're going to do trucks. And that happens. I mean, that's a plot. I mean, that's someone set something in motion, figuring that someone else will do it. I mean, that is a plot. And it's a very large plot in a sense. It's not, the individual involved and not necessarily involved with other people, but, it was a scheme. And it worked. For them, it works. And you don't really know. I mean, if you walk down where this latest thing happened and you look at the Freedom Tower, and then if you go over and you look at the 2 memorial pools and you see the names of all the people who were murdered that day, then you say to yourself, well, what do we do about the names of these people who got murdered on Halloween? These 8 people. I mean, where do we put that in our, national history? That wasn't Pearl Harbor Day. It was smaller, but it's certainly not smaller to each one of those families. And it certainly seems it's going to continue on. And the way you can combat the hijacked airplanes, you can throw up, TSA everywhere, and you search everybody, and you go through underwear and do all that. What are you going to do about? Well, you're going to have vet everybody at Home Depot who does the 1995 deal. I mean, I don't know how you defend against that stuff.
There was quite a bit of back and forth on whether or not this individual should be sent to Guantanamo or should be tried in civilian courts. And a lot of that came from the president himself.
And I think what the dynamic you're seeing here is that the Justice Department is basically plowing forward with its case. The FBI is plowing forward with its investigation. And to the extent they can, they seem to really have been tuning out that sort of White House running commentary that's been going on at the same time. I mean, one of the oddities of this whole thing has been, first the president tweets that he should be sent to, or says that he thinks he probably should go to Gitmo, and then, overnight seems to have a change of heart and says, no, definitely keep him in New York and try him there. And the whole time that's going on, the prosecutors are doing their case, the FBI are doing their case, and the two things aren't necessarily speaking to each other in any meaningful way. So as much as the president seems to be, all over the map as far as the policy issues here go, the straight line of the DOJ and the FBI seems to be pretty clear at this point that they're preparing for what may very well be a death penalty case. And that doesn't so far seem to be really affected by anything that's coming out of Washington or the White House.
Well, Michael, what about trying to find a jury that doesn't know what the president thinks should be done?
Well, most jurors probably wouldn't pay any attention to what this president says. But
well, he's got 41 million people.
We're in the city of New York. I think it was a great victory to have this guy appear charged as a murderer, not as an enemy combatant, not as some part of the war on terror. This was a guy who murdered innocent people, and he's accused of murdering innocent people. Excuse me, I'm running ahead myself. But and I think it's a victory. And there comes that moment when the judge comes in, all rise. This guy's going to rise one way or another. And the proceeding goes, he's going to get a fair trial. The jurors, I mean, if you, in any city, I think jurors work really at doing their duty. I mean, most juries are kind of beautiful things to see. It's one of the great things of America, I think. And and our response, I think, will be the right response. I mean, I would rather see him in Manhattan criminal court, personally. I'd rather not go the Fed way and just have him be in Rikers Island with some people who could really introduce him to what you should do. But the MCC is no happy place to be either. That's the federal lockup. And I think it was a victory to see that. And the worst thing that could have happened would be to send this guy to Gitmo's enemy combatant. You still got Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, right? All those years, 16 years after he murdered thousands of people in downtown Manhattan, he's sitting down there dyeing his beard with Kool-Aid, and he still hasn't gone to trial.
All right, Michael Daly, Devlin Barrett, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.